The night rain had already started to fall when Ethan Harper pulled his rental car into the gravel lot of the only hotel for 50 miles. He had been driving for hours through a stretch of back roads in a part of the country he didn't really know, chasing a meeting he could no longer remember why he had agreed to attend in the first place. His GPS had cut out nearly an hour ago, and the last turn he made felt like guesswork. By the time the neon sign of the Crescent Pines Hotel flickered through the rain, he felt a sense of relief that was strangely out of proportion, like he had stumbled upon something that was meant only for him. The building didn't look like much. 2 stories, long corridors, exterior lights that buzzed with failing bulbs. A sign near the entrance read vacancy, though half its letters had gone dark. The structure was too old for the kind of chain comfort Ethan usually relied on, but the alternative was another 3 hours on unfamiliar roads, alone with the creeping unease that had settled in his chest. Inside, the lobby smelled faintly of wood polish and dust, as though someone had tried to keep the place presentable but hadn't had guests in years. The clerk at the front desk, a thin man with glasses and a permanent slouch, barely looked up from the ledger he was writing in. There was a computer beside him, but it sat dark, as if it hadn't been used in a long while. Checking in, the clerk asked without inflection. "Yes," Ethan said, setting his ID on the counter. "Just for the night." The man slid the ledger toward him with a fountain pen. No digital records, no printed receipts, just names scrawled in long columns. Ethan hesitated, then signed. The clerk slid back a brass key with a small leather tag. "Room 6, 2nd floor," the man said. "Into the hall." Ethan pocketed the key. "Thanks. Is there anywhere nearby that's open late? Food, maybe?" The clerk shook his head once. "Not at this hour." Something about his tone carried a finality that made Ethan drop the subject. He picked up his small suitcase, climbed the creaking stairs, and found the long hallway stretching before him. Each door was painted the same dull beige, numbers nailed to the wood in tarnished brass. Room 6 waited at the very end, slightly apart from the others, as though it had been added later. The lock turned with a stiffness that suggested it wasn't often used. Inside, the room was modest but clean, too clean, in fact. The bedspread looked freshly laundered. The air faintly smelled of bleach, and the single lamp beside the bed cast a pale glow that left the corners of the room in shadow. Ethan tossed his bag on the chair and sat on the edge of the bed. It was quiet here, unnaturally so. For a moment, he thought about pulling back the curtains to look out over the lot, but when he touched the fabric, a strange hesitation stopped him. He couldn't say why. Instead, he left them drawn and tried to settle himself. The night stretched on. He turned on the TV, but it only carried static. The remote didn't seem to change the channels, and after a few minutes, the endless hiss grated on him so much he switched it off. The silence that followed was somehow worse. He lay down, shoes still on, and stared at the ceiling. That was when he heard it. Footsteps in the hall outside his door. Slow. Deliberate. One step, then a pause. Another. Then silence. He waited, expecting a knock or the sound of a neighboring door opening. But nothing came. The footsteps did not retreat. They had simply stopped. His hand hovered over the phone on the bedside table. But when he lifted the receiver, there was no dial tone, just the faint sound of breathing on the other end. He set it down quickly, heart hammering. Sleep did not come easily. When it did, it was shallow, fractured by the sense that someone was standing just beyond the door. He woke often, unsure if minutes or hours had passed. The air in the room felt heavier each time, the walls seeming to lean closer. At last, exhaustion dragged him under fully. He woke to daylight. The lamp was still on. The bedspread was untouched, as though he hadn't shifted at all during the night. His bag still sat on the chair, perfectly undisturbed. For a moment, he wondered if he had even fallen asleep. Pulling himself together, Ethan decided he needed coffee more than answers. He slipped on his jacket, grabbed his key, and left the room. The hallway was bright now, lit by morning sun spilling through tall windows at the far end. Other guests' doors stood neatly in line, brass numbers glinting faintly. He made his way back toward the lobby, only to stop dead in his tracks. Where his door had been, there was nothing but smooth, unbroken wall. He blinked, stepped back, looked again. Rooms 5 and 7 were there, perfectly aligned. But between them was no door, no brass number, no trace that room 6 had ever existed. Ethan stared at the key in his hand. The tag read 6, its edges worn from years of use. He turned it over again and again, as though the number might change if he looked at it differently. But when he looked back at the wall, it remained blank. He felt a presence then, a faint shift in the air, the sensation of eyes on him. He looked down the hallway, but no one was there. Only the pale morning light and the endless quiet. Heart pounding, he forced himself to walk to the lobby. The clerk was there, writing in his ledger as before. Ethan set the key on the counter. "There's a mistake. The room you gave me. Number 6. It's not there anymore." The clerk looked up slowly, his expression unreadable. He glanced at the key, then at Ethan. "We don't have a room 6, he said. Ethan swallowed hard. "That's impossible. I slept there last night." The clerk tilted his head. "Are you sure? I have a key. You gave it to me." The man picked up the tag, examined it, and set it back down. His face showed no recognition, no surprise. "I think you're mistaken. Perhaps you meant room 9. The numbers sometimes get worn." "That's not what I—" Ethan stopped. His voice had risen too sharply, drawing the attention of no one in particular, because the lobby was still empty. No other guests, no staff, just a faint tick of a clock on the wall. The clerk's gaze held his, calm and impenetrable. "Would you like a different room for tonight?" Ethan felt suddenly cold. He picked up the key again, clutching it like proof of his sanity. The brass was warm to the touch, almost unnaturally so. He faltered. His throat was dry. "I'll think about it." The clerk nodded, already returning to his ledger. Ethan turned and walked out into the weak daylight. The world beyond the hotel, strangely muted. The gravel lot was empty, his car alone among the faded parking lines. Beyond it stretched an expanse of pine trees, tall and close, their branches swaying in a wind he could not feel. He climbed into his car, started the engine, and sat with his hands on the wheel. Every instinct told him to drive, to leave this place and never return. But the memory of the footsteps outside his door, the voice on the phone line, the impossibility of the vanished room, all of it clung to him like a weight. He looked back at the building. The second-floor windows stared down blankly. One of them, he realized, should have been his. But from the outside, there was no sign of room 6 at all. Ethan tried to convince himself that leaving was the only rational choice. He put the car in gear, gravel crunching beneath the tires as he turned toward the narrow road that led back into the woods. The trees closed around him almost immediately, the sunlight thinning into weak rays that barely cut through the canopy. He kept glancing at the rearview mirror, watching the hotel shrink into a distant shape until it disappeared completely. But the further he drove, the more uneasy he felt. The road wound on, mile after mile, yet nothing changed. No gas stations, no intersections, no signs of another town. Just the same endless trees, repeating like a loop. He checked the time on the dashboard. 40 minutes had passed, but his fuel gauge barely shifted. He slowed, pulled to the side of the road, and stepped out. Silence pressed in around him, the kind of silence that made his ears ring. Not a single bird, not even the hum of insects. Only the faint whisper of wind through the trees. He stood there a long time, trying to shake the feeling that he wasn't alone. The woods seemed to lean closer with each passing second. Finally, he got back in the car and drove on. 10 more minutes. 20. 30. When he rounded a bend, his hands tightened on the wheel. There, through the thinning mist, the familiar neon sign flickered weakly. Crescent Pines Hotel. His chest tightened. He had been driving away for nearly an hour. But here it was again, sitting in the clearing as though it had been waiting for him. He pulled into the lot, engine idling, staring at the building. Everything looked exactly the same. The buzzing exterior lights, the peeling paint, the empty parking spaces. His car tracks still marked the gravel, looping away and returning like he had never left at all. Slowly, he cut the engine. Inside, the lobby was unchanged. The same faint smell of polish and dust. The same clock ticking steadily on the wall. And the clerk, seated at the desk, writing in his ledger. He He looked up as Ethan entered, adjusting his glasses slightly. Back so soon. Ethan froze. What do you mean? You just stepped out a moment ago. Ethan shook his head. I've been driving for over an hour. Maybe two. The clerk's expression didn't change. He glanced at the clock. It's been 5 minutes. Ethan's mouth went dry. He wanted to argue, but the words stuck in his throat. He turned his gaze to the ledger on the desk. The clerk's hand rested lightly on the page. Ethan caught sight of his own name, written in dark ink, exactly where he had signed the night before. But there was something different now. Next to his name, faintly, was another word. Occupied. He blinked, rubbed his eyes, looked again. The word was gone. The clerk snapped the ledger closed. Would you like me to prepare a room for you tonight? Ethan's hand clenched around the brass key in his pocket. He didn't pull it out, but he felt its warmth against his palm. Yes, he heard himself say, though the word felt like it belonged to someone else. The clerk gave a small nod, opened a drawer, and produced another key. This one bore the number 12. Second floor again, he said, midway down the hall. Ethan hesitated, then reached for it. The clerk's fingers lingered a fraction too long as he handed it over, the touch leaving a chill that sank into Ethan's skin. Upstairs, the hallway was bright with daylight. Room 12 was exactly where it should have been, nestled between 11 and 13. The key turned smoothly, the door swinging open to reveal a room that looked identical to the last. Modest, clean, the faint smell of bleach clinging to the air. He stepped inside, set his bag down again, and closed the door behind him. The quiet was immediate, suffocating. For the rest of the afternoon, Ethan paced. He checked the curtains, though outside the view showed only the endless pines. He tried the TV again. Still static. He even opened the drawer in the bedside table, finding only an old Bible with warped pages. But what unsettled him most was the phone. It sat silent on the table, receiver in place. He picked it up, pressed it to his ear. At first, there was nothing. Then, faintly, he heard a whisper. Not words, just the sound of someone breathing. He hung up quickly, chest tight. By evening, the sky outside had darkened to gray. The shadows stretched long across the carpet. Ethan sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the brass keys in his hand. Room 12 in his right palm, room 6 in his left. Two impossibilities gleaming softly in the fading light. The knock came just after dusk. 3 taps. Soft, deliberate. He froze, breath caught in his throat. Slowly, he approached the door, pressed his ear against it. Silence. Then, just barely, he heard movement. Someone shifting their weight as though standing inches away. His hand hovered over the knob, but he couldn't bring himself to turn it. The knock came again, louder this time. Who is it? Ethan forced out, his voice rough. Silence. He stepped back. His pulse hammered in his ears. The third knock rattled the door. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. He waited, chest heaving, until the silence returned. The air in the room felt charged, like static clinging to his skin. He sat awake long after, staring at the door, waiting for the knock to return. It didn't. At some point, exhaustion pulled him down again. When he woke, the morning light was filtering through the curtains. His heart sank before he even checked. He knew what he would find. The door he had locked, the room he had slept in, was gone. The brass key to room 12 lay on the bedside table, but when he opened the door and stepped into the hallway, there was nothing between rooms 11 and 13 but blank wall. He staggered back, pressing his palms to his temples. His breathing quickened. The world tilted. Room 6, room 12. Both vanished, both swallowed by the hotel as though they had never existed. And yet, the keys were still warm in his pocket. Ethan didn't leave the hotel that morning. He couldn't. Something about the idea of stepping outside again, of driving down that endless road only to return, filled him with a dread deeper than staying put. At least inside, he could see what was wrong. Out there, reality folded in ways he couldn't even begin to understand. He sat in the lobby for a long time, watching the clerk write silently in his ledger. The man never seemed to look up unless Ethan spoke, never seemed to move except to dip his fountain pen in ink. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, but Ethan noticed something unsettling. No matter how long he sat, The minute hand never reached the top. It circled again and again, but it never struck 12. Eventually, he asked the question that had been pressing against his skull. "How long have you worked here?" The clerk looked up, glasses catching the light. He tilted his head slightly, as though the question were in a language he didn't understand. "As long as I've needed to." Ethan frowned. "And how long is that?" The man smiled faintly. It was the first expression Ethan had seen on his face, and it made his skin crawl. "As long as there have been rooms." The answer meant nothing and everything all at once. Ethan turned away, unsettled. He decided to walk the hallways. Perhaps there was something he'd missed. Another wing, a hidden staircase, anything to explain what was happening. The upstairs corridor was silent as always, the carpet muted in color, the doors identical. He counted each one carefully. 10 on the right side, 10 on the left. But when he reached the end of the hall, the numbers didn't line up. Room 19 was followed by 21. He blinked, checked again. The even number was missing. He pulled out his keys. 6 and 12 glinted in his palm, solid and undeniable. Both rooms gone, both numbers erased. And now, another was missing. He turned quickly, half expecting the corridor behind him to change. It hadn't, but the silence pressed harder, as though the walls were listening. That night, he tried to stay awake. He sat in the chair with both keys on the table in front of him, eyes fixed on the door. Hours crawled by. The hotel seemed to breathe around him, floorboards creaking as if under invisible weight. Once he thought he heard footsteps again, slow and deliberate. But this time, they didn't stop outside his door. They passed through the hall, moving steadily, until the sound simply faded. He dared to open the door, heart pounding. The hallway stretched empty, bathed in a dim yellow glow from the sconces. Nothing stirred, yet he swore he could smell something faint, like smoke or dust burning on an old light bulb. When he returned to his chair, he saw the keys weren't where he had left them. They had moved, sliding an inch closer to the edge of the table. He stared at them, unmoving. No one had entered. He had seen no hand touch them, yet they had shifted closer to him, as if drawn. He didn't touch them again. Sleep caught him despite his resistance. He woke with a start, sunlight cutting across the room. His first instinct was to check the hall. He didn't even need to open the door. The keys were gone. Not just gone, they had vanished without a trace. His pockets were empty, the table bare. But when he stepped into the corridor, his stomach twisted. This time, there were no numbers at all. Every door was blank. Brass plaques that had once marked the rooms were gone, leaving smooth wood in their place. 20 identical doors in a row, unmarked, leading nowhere. Ethan staggered back, pulse racing. He gripped the wall for support, but even the wallpaper seemed different now. Darker, older, peeling in places it hadn't before. The smell of bleach was gone, replaced by something faintly rotten, as though the hotel were shedding its mask. He hurried downstairs. The lobby was empty, the desk abandoned, ledger closed. For the first time, the clerk wasn't there. The silence was unbearable. He walked outside into the parking lot, desperate for air. His car sat exactly where he'd left it. Relief surged through him. He climbed in, turned the key. The engine sputtered, then caught. He slammed the gear shift into reverse. The car didn't move. He pressed harder on the pedal. The tires spun, gravel spraying. But the car didn't budge an inch, as though something invisible held it in place. The steering wheel fought his grip, pulling itself back to center no matter how hard he twisted. He turned off the engine, trembling. When he stepped back out, the pines seemed closer than ever, crowding the lot. Their trunks stood in silent ranks, branches shivering though the air was still. And then he noticed them. In the shadows between the trees, figures stood. Too far to see clearly, but their outlines were unmistakable. Tall, motionless, facing him. His mouth went dry. He blinked, and for a moment they were gone. Only the trees remained. But when he turned back to the hotel, he knew. The figures weren't in the woods. They were inside. That night, Ethan didn't bother trying to sleep. He sat in the lobby, waiting for the clerk to return. Hours passed. The clock ticked endlessly toward a midnight that never arrived. At last, footsteps approached. He straightened, bracing himself. But it wasn't the clerk. A woman appeared, pale and quiet, her hair falling across her face. She wore a dress that looked decades old, faded at the seams. She didn't acknowledge him, didn't even glance his way. She walked to the desk, ran her hand over the closed ledger, and then turned toward the stairs. "Wait," Ethan called, his voice cracking. She stopped. Slowly, she raised her head. Her eyes met his. And in that moment, Ethan understood something terrible. She wasn't alive. Her gaze was empty, vacant, yet heavy with a sorrow, so deep it felt like a weight pressing on his chest. She opened her mouth as though to speak. No sound came, only a faint exhale, carrying with it the smell of damp earth. Then she turned and ascended the stairs. Ethan followed without meaning to, drawn after her. Each step creaked under his weight, though she made no sound at all. At the top of the stairs, she stopped outside a door. It was blank like the others, but she reached for the knob with trembling fingers. She glanced back at him once more, and he thought he saw tears in her eyes. Then she opened the door and slipped inside. The moment the door shut, the brass number appeared. Ethan froze. His blood ran cold. Room 6 had returned. Ethan's breath came shallow as he stood in the hallway, staring at the brass plaque that should not have existed. Room 6. The number gleamed softly in the dim light, as if it had always been there, waiting. His hand trembled as he reached for the knob. The metal was cold, biting against his skin. He hesitated, the memory of his first night flooding back. Footsteps outside, whispers on the phone, the suffocating silence pressing in. But curiosity, or something deeper, pulled him closer. The door opened without resistance. Inside, the room looked exactly as it had before. Bed neatly made, curtains drawn, air faint with bleach. But something was different this time. On the bed lay an object that hadn't been there before. A photograph. Ethan stepped closer, picking it up carefully. The image was old, the corners curled, the surface yellowed with age. It showed a group of people standing outside the Crescent Pines Hotel, smiling stiffly for the camera. Their clothes suggested decades past, suits, dresses, wide collars. But what made his stomach clench was the background. The hotel looked identical to how it did now. Not newer, not older. The same peeling paint, the same buzzing lights. As though time hadn't touched it. And at the edge of the group, barely visible, stood the woman he had seen the night before. Her hair fell across her face, her hands folded neatly in front of her. She wasn't smiling. Her eyes seemed fixed on the camera, hollow even then. Ethan dropped the photo back onto the bed. His hand shook. The air in the room shifted suddenly, colder, heavier. He felt it behind him, the faint sense of breath on the back of his neck. He turned quickly, but the room was empty. He stumbled out, slamming the door shut. His pulse thundered in his ears. Downstairs, the clerk had returned to his place at the desk. The ledger lay open before him. Ethan stormed forward, slapping his hand on the counter. "What is this place?" The clerk looked up calmly. "It is a hotel. Don't play with me." Ethan's voice cracked, louder than he intended. "I saw her. A woman. She went into room 6. And I know what I saw in that picture." The clerk tilted his head slightly, unbothered. Many guests passed through. Some stay longer than others. Ethan leaned forward, his hands gripping the counter. "What happened to her?" For the first time, the clerk hesitated. His pen hovered above the paper. Then, without looking up, he said softly, "She stayed." That's all anyone can do. The words chilled Ethan to the bone. He glanced down at the ledger. The pages were filled with names, written in neat, slanted script. Each one marked with dates, though most were incomplete. No checkout recorded. Some of the names looked old, almost archaic. And there, near the bottom, was his own. Ethan Harper, room 6. But there was another word beside it now, faint but undeniable. Pending. His throat tightened. "Erase it. Take my name off." The clerk didn't look up. "That is not my decision." "Then whose is it?" Ethan demanded. The man finally raised his eyes, and for the first time, Ethan felt real fear in the weight of his stare. The hotel keeps its own records. Ethan staggered back. His hand shook as he turned and left the lobby. He needed air. He needed to think. Outside, the pines swayed gently, their branches whispering against each other. The figures he thought he'd seen before were gone. but their absence felt more threatening than their presence. He walked along the edge of the lot, gravel crunching underfoot, until he reached the far corner where weeds pushed through cracked asphalt. There, half buried in the dirt, he saw something glinting. He crouched, brushed away the soil, and uncovered another brass key. Number 8. His stomach churned. He pocketed it quickly, almost afraid the hotel would notice. When he returned inside, the atmosphere felt heavier, as though the building itself had shifted in his absence. The wallpaper seemed darker still, the lights dimmer, the air carrying that faint, rotten edge. He went back to his room. Not room 6, not room 12, but the one he had been given last. Blanc door, unmarked. Inside, he locked the door behind him, sat on the bed, and pulled out the 3 keys. They lay in his palm, warm and heavy. A collection of impossibilities, each representing a room that shouldn't exist anymore. As night fell, he set them on the table, unable to look away. That was when he heard the whispers. At first, he thought it was the wind, but the sound grew clearer, threading through the walls. Voices, low, overlapping, indistinct. He pressed his ear to the wall, straining to hear. They were coming from the empty rooms. He stepped into the hallway. The air was colder here, his breath faintly visible. The doors stretched endlessly, blank and silent. Yet from behind them, the whispers continued, some urgent, some weeping, some barely audible. He moved down the hall slowly, heart hammering. Each step seemed to echo louder than the last. He stopped outside the door nearest him, pressed his hand against the wood. It vibrated faintly, as though someone inside leaned against the other side. He forced himself away, retreating back to his room. He shut the door, sat with his back against it, and waited for morning. But when he woke, the keys were gone again. And this time, the entire hallway was missing. When he opened his door, there was nothing beyond it. No corredor, no carpete, no walls. Only darkness. A vast, endless black stretching into infinity. His stomach lurched. He clung to the doorframe, staring into the void. The air carried no sound, no scent, nothing. Only emptiness. Behind him, the phone rang. He turned slowly, dread coiling tight in his chest. The rotary phone on the bedside table rattled with each shrill tone, vibrating against the wood. He lifted the receiver with a trembling hand. Silence. Then faintly a voice. Stay. Ethan slammed the phone down, breath ragged. When he turned back toward the doorway, the corridor had returned. The walls, the carpet, the faint yellow glow of the lights. As if nothing had changed. But he knew better. The hotel was testing him. Ethan didn't remember falling asleep, but he woke with his head against the desk, the faint impression of the wood pressed into his skin. Morning light filtered weakly through the curtains. For a moment, everything was quiet, almost peaceful. He almost convinced himself the night before had been a dream. But then he saw the ledger. It sat open on the desk in front of him, though he had never brought it upstairs. The pages smelled faintly of dust and ink, and though the script was neat, it looked different now. More jagged, hurried, as if written by many hands. He flipped through. Names filled every page. Hundreds, maybe thousands. Some crossed out, some smudged, but others glared up at him in stark clarity. He paused on one. Clara Jensen. Room 6. Stayed. His blood ran cold. He turned another page. Daniel C. Moore. Room 12. Stayed. Another. Margaret Hedlund. Room 8. Stayed. And then, Ethan Harper. Room 6. Pending. He snapped the book shut, heart pounding. His hands shook as he shoved it away, but the name burned in his mind. The word pending hovered over him like a sentence waiting to be carried out. There was no denying it now. The rooms weren't just vanishing. They were keeping people. A faint knock came at the door. Not the heavy, deliberate pounding he'd heard before, but a softer rhythm. Hesitant, Ethan froze. The knock came again. Cautiously, he opened the door. The woman stood there. Her dress hung limply, threads fraying at the seams. Her hair shifted as if stirred by a wind he couldn't feel. Her eyes were hollow, dark circles beneath them, but they fixed on his with desperate intensity. This time, she spoke. You shouldn't have signed. Her voice was soft, brittle like glass about to shatter. Ethan swallowed hard. "Who are you?" Her gaze flicked toward the hall, then back to him. "Clara." The name hit him like a blow. "Clara Jensen. Room 6. Stayed. What do you want from me?" he whispered. She shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "It's not what I want. It's what the hotel wants. It takes us, room by room, one by one." Ethan stepped back, pulse racing. "Why? Why me?" "You signed," she said again, her voice breaking. "That's all it takes. Once your name is in the ledger, you belong." He gripped the edge of the doorframe, fighting to keep his balance. "How do I get out?" Clara's expression twisted with sorrow. "You don't." The words echoed through him, hollowing his chest. She stepped closer, and though her form seemed fragile, the air around her grew colder, heavy with grief. "But you can resist. You can refuse the room. Don't take the keys. Don't go inside. I already have." His voice cracked. "Rooms 6, 12, 8. I stayed in them." Her eyes widened in despair. A shiver ran through her frame, distorting her outline. For a moment, her face blurred, as though he were seeing her through water. "You've given it too much," she whispered. "The hotel feeds on you. It won't let go now." Ethan tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. Clara reached out suddenly, her cold hand brushing his. The touch made his skin ache, but there was urgency in her grip. "Find the burned room," she said, her voice fierce. That's where it began, and then she was gone. The hall stood empty. Ethan staggered back into his room, breathing hard. His thoughts raced. The burned room. He had seen no sign of it, but maybe he hadn't been looking closely enough. He searched the hotel relentlessly for the rest of the day. Down every corridor, through every stairwell, even into the dusty storage room behind the lobby. Nothing. Every door was blank again, the numbers gone, the sameness suffocating. But that night the smell gave it away. He woke to smoke, faint but unmistakable. Not the acrid sting of new fire, but the deep, bitter scent of something long extinguished. He followed it through the dark hallways, the walls seeming to stretch and warp with each step. At last he found it, a door at the very end of a narrow passage, blackened around the edges. The wood was scarred, charred deep, though the handle gleamed as if polished daily. No number marked it, only the faint outline where one had once been. His hand shook as he reached for the knob. It turned easily. Inside, the air was heavy with soot and sorrow. The walls were scorched, the ceiling collapsed in places. Char marks licked up toward the corners, frozen reminders of flames that had raged long ago. The carpet was gone, replaced by blackened boards, and in the center of the room stood a chair. Someone sat in it. A man, his suit burned in patches, his skin pale. His head hung forward, but when Ethan stepped inside, he raised it slowly. His eyes were empty, yet they pinned Ethan where he stood. "You shouldn't be here," the man said, his voice hollow, echoing unnaturally in the ruined space. Ethan swallowed hard. "What is this place? What happened here?" The man's gaze drifted toward the walls, the scars of fire. This was the beginning, the first room the hotel took. There was a fire long ago. Guests died. Staff too. But the hotel, it didn't burn. It took us instead. His words reverberated with something more than sound, a weight that settled into Ethan's bones. "It's been hungry ever since," the man continued. "Every name in the ledger, every key, every vanished door, it all started here, and it will never end." Ethan shook his head, his chest tight. "There has to be a way out. There has to be." The man's expression twisted into something almost pitying. "Out." His voice cracked. "You're already part of it. The moment you opened your door, the moment you slept inside, you belonged." Ethan's knees weakened. He grabbed the charred doorframe for support. The man leaned forward, his burned suit shifting stiffly. "The hotel doesn't want you to leave. It wants you to stay. Forever. Like us." The air grew heavier, thicker, pressing against Ethan's lungs. Shadows lengthened across the room, crawling along the walls. He felt them reaching for him, curling like fingers. With a desperate burst of strength, he stumbled backward out of the room, slamming the door shut behind him. The whispers in the hall rose instantly, furious, overlapping. Doors rattled on either side, unseen hands clawing to get out. The entire hotel seemed to shudder, vibrating with anger. Ethan ran. He didn't stop until he burst into the lobby, chest heaving, sweat slick on his skin. The clerk sat at the desk, as always calm, pen scratching steadily across the page. Ethan staggered forward, slamming his palms on the counter. You knew what happened here." The clerk looked up slowly, adjusting his glasses. "The hotel has needs. I serve them. People are trapped in here." Ethan's voice broke. "Clara, that man in the burned room. How many others?" The clerk's expression didn't change. "As many as there must be." Ethan's vision swam. Rage surged through him, but beneath it was despair. He was caught in something vast, something ancient, and he didn't know how to fight it. But Clara's words burned in his mind. "Resist. Don't take the keys." He clenched his fists. Maybe he couldn't escape yet, but he wouldn't surrender either. Not without a fight. Ethan didn't sleep. He couldn't. The hotel felt alive around him, its walls breathing in slow, deliberate rhythm. The whispers hadn't stopped since he fled the burned room. They threaded through the halls, seeping under doors, curling into his mind until he could almost make out words. His name, over and over. "Stay, Ethan. Stay." He sat in the lobby, watching the clerk write endlessly in his ledger. The scratch of the pen against paper was constant, steady, like a heartbeat. Finally, Ethan stood. His voice shook, but he forced the words out. "I'm not going to stay. Do you hear me? You can't have me." The clerk looked up slowly. His eyes glinted behind the glasses, unreadable. "You've already signed, Mr. Harper. It's not about want. It's about record." He closed the ledger with a soft thud. "Your place is already written." Ethan slammed his fists against the counter, rage and terror mixing in his veins. "Then I'll erase it myself." Before the clerk could move, Ethan snatched the ledger and bolted. The man didn't chase him. He simply watched, his expression calm, as though everything was unfolding exactly as expected. Ethan ran upstairs, clutching the book. He shoved open the door to his room, slammed it shut behind him, and dropped the ledger on the desk. His hands shook as he flipped through, scanning desperately until he found his name again. Ethan Harper, room 6, pending. The ink looked wet, as if freshly written. With trembling fingers, he tore the page out. The sound echoed unnaturally, a sharp rip that seemed to reverberate through the walls. He tore again, shredding his name into pieces, scattering them across the floor. For a heartbeat, silence. And then, the hotel roared. The walls shuddered violently, dust falling from the ceiling. The lights flickered, then burst, plunging the room into darkness. The air grew suffocating, filled with the deafening chorus of whispers. Doors in the hallway slammed open and shut in rapid succession, like hands clapping in unison. Ethan stumbled back, heart racing. He had angered it. The shredded paper on the floor began to move, sliding across the carpet as if pulled by invisible threads. The pieces reassembled, fusing back together into a single page. His name reappeared, bolder than before. Ethan Harper, room 6. Stayed. His stomach dropped. "No," he whispered. "No, that's not." The phone rang. He stared at it, frozen. The shrill tone cut through the chaos, relentless. His hand moved before his mind could stop it. He lifted the receiver. The voice was calm. "Familiar. You've already checked in, Mr. Harper. There is no checking out." Ethan's breath caught. It was his own voice. He dropped the phone, heart hammering. The door creaked open behind him. Slowly, he turned. The corridor stretched out, but it was no longer blank. Every door now bore a brass number. 6, 8, 12, and more, numbers he had never seen before, stretching higher and higher, as if the hall had grown infinite. Each door glowed faintly, beckoning, and from behind each one came sounds. Whispers, sobs, faint laughter. Lives trapped inside. The closest door swung open on its own. Inside, he saw a figure sitting on the bed, back turned to him, shoulders hunched, head in his hands. It was himself. Ethan staggered back, slamming against the wall. The figure on the bed lifted its head, turning slowly. Its face was pale, hollow, eyes ringed with darkness. His own eyes, staring back at him. "You belong here," the double whispered. "We all do." The doors began to open, one by one, figures emerging from each. Clara, the burned man, countless others. Their faces were blank with sorrow, their eyes hollow. They filled the hall, moving toward him silently. Ethan ran. He sprinted down the corridor, doors opening as he passed, hands reaching out. The hall stretched endlessly, no exit in sight. His lungs burned, his legs ached, but still he ran. Finally, he saw it. The lobby. He burst through, stumbling to the desk where the clerk still sat calmly, ledger open once more. Ethan slammed his hands down, panting. "Let me go." The clerk's pen scratched across the page, steady and unhurried. He didn't look up as he said, "You've already gone, Mr. Harper." Ethan froze. The ledger lay open, his name written clearly. Ethan Harper, room 6. Stayed. Beside it was a date. The day before. He felt the ground tilt beneath him. His breath hitched, his vision swimming. "That's not possible." The clerk finally looked up. "You've been here longer than you realize." Ethan staggered back, shaking his head violently. "No, I just got here. Last night. I drove in last night. Did you?" The clerk's smile was faint, cruel in its calmness. "Or do you only remember arriving?" The lobby shifted around him. The walls peeled, revealing older wood beneath. The chandelier above sagged with cobwebs. Dust covered the floor. The hotel looked ancient, abandoned. And yet, the clock ticked steadily. Ethan's knees gave out. He sank to the floor, trembling. His mind screamed at him to run, to fight, but his body wouldn't move. The whispers surrounded him now, close, intimate, filling his ears with the sound of countless voices. Clara stepped forward from the shadows, her eyes heavy with sorrow. She knelt beside him, touching his hand. "It's too late," she whispered. "You've already stayed." The last thing Ethan saw was the ledger. His name inked forever, no longer pending, no longer uncertain. Appel maintenant record. The hotel had claimed him, and by morning, room 6 was gone again, waiting for the next guest.